Hello, welcome to the Sports Philanthropy Podcast. I am your host, Roy Kessel, and today we are very excited to have with us a special guest. We have Olympic champion Nancy Hogshead-Makar, and we're very excited to learn more about the incredible work she's doing on behalf of women and girls in sports. Nancy has been a civil rights lawyer for many years, involved in the Sports Lawyers Association, and she has started an initiative called ChampionWomen, which focuses on legal advocacy for women and girls in sports. So Nancy, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Roy. I'm looking forward to this.
Your work has so much depth and has taken on such an importance in what we see going on in the world today in terms of some of the athlete abuse and other areas that are really detrimental to the world of sports. But I want to back you up for a minute before we dive into all of that great work that you're doing and talk about what got Nancy attracted to sports when you were young.
Yeah, no great beginnings. My parents bought a boat and they just wanted to drown-proof us kids. So it's just a little 16-footer ski boat. We had a ball in the summers, and they just wanted to make sure that me and my brother and my little sister, we could like swim a mile onto shore. And my first coach ever was Eddie Reese. Anybody in swimming knows he's been 40 years at the University of Texas and probably had 100 Olympians. But he was probably, I'm guessing, 22 years old, and he just made it fun. So, yeah, got started there. My siblings wanted nothing more to do with it, and I couldn't get enough.
So going from being trained to be drown-proof to Olympic champion is quite a long journey. Take us through some of that.
Sure. So I have to say I was good right away. And it was kind of a joke. I was just with my friends who, when I was like 11 years old and I was swimming with them, and they wrote me a telegram at the 1984 Olympics that tells you how old I am. And it said, "We always wondered why you were an A swimmer and we were B swimmers, and now we know." So when I was 11, our family moved to Jacksonville, Florida. I got Eddie's coach, Randy Reese, and Randy and that team was nationally focused. I had never heard of nationals before. I was in it to, win some little age group race. And so they really set my sights much higher. We had 1976 Olympic bronze medalist Billy Forrester on our team. We had a bunch of people who were really close to making the 1976 Olympic team. I learned so much about how important it is to surround yourself with people who kind of want the same thing that you do, who set a very high standard of working hard. My peers in the Jacksonville swim team with Matt Hobart and Lauren Dupree Mahoney and all these amazing swimmers, they set the bar so high as to what was expected in workouts. So just to give you an idea of what it's like to train for the Olympics, it's about 2 hours in the morning of swimming, got up at 4:45, and then swam from 5:30 to 7:30. My school went from 8 to 4 in the afternoon. And in the middle of school, we lifted weights or we ran on alternate days. And then it was 2 more hours after school. So it's not something that one does lightly. So when I was 15, I moved away from home to train for the 1980 Olympics. And this would have been like 1978. And I changed schools, the whole 9 yards. And I made the 1980 Olympic team. But as you know, the United States boycotted those Olympics. And then from there, I went to college, and I was one of the first people to get a college scholarship in swimming at Duke University. And then I actually had to take time off college to train for the 1984 Olympics. And I did, and I won 3 gold medals and 1 silver medal in the 1984 Olympics.
Well, that's an incredible achievement. And as you said, the amount of hard work that goes into that is something in any sport that I think those fans that just, let's say the average fan that sits at home and watches on TV or attends a sporting event doesn't realize the number of hours that go into that, and that mental grind and challenge that goes along with preparing to be an elite athlete.
Yeah, it's typically a decade to get there. It's really a decade of your life.
And it's very intense. It goes quickly, and as you look back on that, if you were able to change something, what would you have changed about the way that you approached that training?
What would I have changed? Well, I just would have been older and wiser sooner. So probably one of the best things that happened as I got older was that I really had to choose it in order to train for the 1984 Olympics, to drop out of college, to give up my scholarship. They ended up giving it back to me, but I didn't know that at the time. To give up, housing and all that, and to move away and be gone for a year and a half, not graduating with my peers, I really had to want it badly in order to be able to do it. As opposed to when I was younger, there was just a tiny bit of me that was a little bit a victim of my own talent. Like, oh, why do I have to be so good? Like, why can't I lead a normal life? Why can't I? So I just would have kind of figured that out sooner, that making the choice to be able to be there is a lot better life. It's a lot more fun.
Well, it is fun to get there, but you learn along the way. And if you just snap your fingers and put you at that advanced stage, there's certainly other nuances that you picked up along the way that you wouldn't have had. So it's
Sure.
So when did you first have the concept that you wanted to go into this type of work in terms of representing girls and women and becoming a civil rights lawyer?
I knew I wanted to do something that revolved around women, and I just wasn't really sure. It was very sort of amorphous, sort of in the sky early on. My sophomore year in college, I was raped. So I was out running. Duke has 2 campuses, and this guy, stops me and says, "Hey, where's Duke University?" And I stopped, and he grabbed me and swung me around and took me into the woods. And it was about 2.5 hours later that I got out, and I am very lucky to be alive. I'm grateful that I was able to kind of keep my wits about me and be able to strategize and how to get out of there. But anyway, I did. And I went straight to the police department. They could not have been nicer. Duke University bent over backwards for me. They could not have done more to make sure that I graduated, that my grades didn't suffer, that I was supported, and I just was eternally grateful. I still am today. I'll be 60 next week, and I'm still grateful for Duke University. And I recognized that there was no amount of achievement that I could do that would have me escape sexism, right? So I knew that there was this thing called sexism, that people thought less of women and what they were doing was not as important. And I mean, I was a women athlete, for goodness sakes. But when I was younger, I thought I could sort of outrun it, if you will, right? I could be smart enough and fast enough and get enough accolades that it wasn't going to impact me, but it did. There's the lengths of what women have to go through to avoid sexual assault in their lives is pretty stunning. So I was at the Olympics in 1984, finally, and Donna DeVerona came and talked to all of us, the whole swim team, men's and women's, and said, "You're about to become famous." And I was kind of looking around like, what, me? And she goes, "What are you going to do with it?" And then she said, "I hope it has something to do with Title IX." Because at the time, she was imploring us that there was this bad United States Supreme Court case called Grove City versus Bell that held that essentially Title IX didn't apply to athletics. So we had to go back to Congress and get it repassed again. So most people don't know that Title IX is actually passed twice. once in 1972 and again in 1988. So that's kind of what got me into it. So I started interning at the Women's Sports Foundation between my junior and senior year in college. And of course, now I'm like 23, I'm a little older. And no, I loved it. I loved the whole, being involved. And I could see when I spent some time living in New York City and being an Olympic champion and making lots of money, that I could see that the people who were having the most fun with women's advocacy were the lawyers. And so I went to Georgetown Law School. I just got back from my reunion. Amazing women. We had a ball. And and I, sort of went on the path from there to starting ChampionWomen in 2014. And I kind of looked at my career as like, how many more years do I have left? And if you only do cases, doing the case, as everybody knows, like takes a ton, right? You can only handle so many at a time, as opposed to if you do what I do, you can get the party started. You can do a lot. You can sort of really move the needle, move the dial. The lawyers who are doing the Title IX cases can't do what I do. Either they're prohibited ethically from doing what I do, like, they're not allowed to gin up cases. Or two is the lawyers, they just don't have time. They can't be, doing my job and their job at the same time. So, so we started ChampionWomen. I had been a tenured professor of law before that. And so I kind of know what law school students, that age group and that skill set, what they can do. And they are really helpful. So our model is we always have somewhere between like 3 and 8 research assistants to help with our work. So it's not just me. Yeah.
Well, that's a big undertaking. And, you said you went to Georgetown Law School, and then where were you teaching?
I was at Florida Coastal School of Law here in Jacksonville, Florida. Yeah. And I'm teaching now at Rutgers.
Okay. So
their global sports business program.
Well, you've seen sports from a lot of different angles, and as you got into that, I think you did a good job articulating the fact that it's really hard to handle a huge volume of litigation, just given the requirements of those types of cases. But in your role as an advocate and supporting those efforts, you're able to really amplify the voices there and bring in some of the top litigation specialists around the country.
Yeah, that's exactly the goal is, you've got to get to so can we, Roy, talk about, how Title IX is going backwards?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we saw when we're up at the Final Four in Minneapolis, a lot of groups celebrating 50 years of Title IX, and you and I have talked about the fact that, it's 50 years and we're still nowhere close to where we need to be. And I think that leads right into some of the research that you've done.
Yeah, I had this phenomenal director of operations, Janine Kistner, and she helped me and helped us create this website called Title IX Schools, TITLEIX schools.com. And Janine, when I wasn't able to travel, I actually found that I was so much more productive not traveling during COVID. So I don't think I'm going to go back to my former life. So we looked at each school and how many sports opportunities do they need to add for women in order to be giving equal opportunities. We looked at what percentage of their student body is participating in sports. And we looked at the history of how it is that these schools were growing or not, to be able to show that they were giving women enough sports opportunities. So if you go onto our website, you can look at any institution of higher ed, including junior colleges, Division 1, 2, 3, NAIA, the whole ball of wax, and look at how many opportunities do they need to add, how many scholarship opportunities do they need to add, and how many recruiting dollars do they need to add in order to be able to be giving women equal opportunities and an equal educational opportunity. So, and the big picture, Roy, is not good. The big picture is schools need to add over 183,000 opportunities for women in sports. They need to add $1 billion in college scholarships. So let's get this straight. These women are not getting this money because they're women. That's the only reason. And this is it's okay. But one of the most surprising things that I found when we looked at the data over time, again, it's on the website, is how the gap between men's and women's sports is growing. And it's growing significantly just since Mark Emmert at the NCAA has been there. The gap has grown by 27%. And this is all, you know, what we recognized was that we had to get girls in high school and women in college to do the work of making the school comply with the law, that schools were just not doing it on their own. We had a huge project in 2020, you can see it on our website, where we wrote letters to every single conference in the country. And we showed them, like, you know, here's all the schools, and we gave them a legal memo. I think every legal memo was like, you know, 10 pages, single spaced, and showing that they just how far out of compliance that they were. And interestingly enough, the Power Five are like the worst. You would think with all the money that they have that they would be closer, but the ACC alone, which includes my alma mater, Duke, needs to add $40 million in college scholarships. There's just one conference. And they need to add not quite 1,500 opportunities in sports. So it's not a lack of money that is driving this. It is inattention to detail, inattention to what are you giving the men? What are you giving the women? You know, making sure that those are equal.
So when you look at those gaps and the reason for that gap growing, are you able to identify the primary cause of the gap growing? Is it primarily coaching salaries, or what's causing the growth in that gap?
Mark Emmert stopped requiring schools to show that they were in compliance. There used to be a program started by Judy Sweet and Donna Lopiano, and you know, these amazing women who were able to show that schools were not complying back in, I think it was 1992. So they started a program called certification, and it was only a once every 10-year requirement, and schools had to show that they were growing, and that you know, here's what the plan is to achieve gender equity. And he stopped it right when it starts like getting some teeth, you know, like the first year, it's not going to do anything. The next 10 years, you know, right. But it is the next 10 years when it really starts to have teeth and really starts to bite that makes the biggest difference. And that's when Mark Emmert pulled it. So when you look at like, well, then who's going to do the enforcing? Is it going to be the Department of Education? No, they don't affirmatively go out and make sure that schools are in compliance. If they do get a complaint, most of their complaints are very narrow, meaning we don't have a softball field, or you know, we don't have a coach, as opposed to like looking at the whole program and making sure that in all the areas that there's equality between boys and girls and men and women. Unlike, say, a sexual harassment case or an employment case where somebody doesn't get hired or whatnot, it puts a lot of burden on the plaintiff. Not true when it comes to an athletics case, because you're really just looking at the facts, which are a lot of times stipulated between the parties as to, we're offering men this many opportunities, women this many opportunities. So we decided that our job was, given that there is no enforcement of Title IX when it comes to athletics, that we had to do it. We had to get the party started. And so we have these big Zoom meetings, and so far I've only been unsuccessful once in convincing the players to not just get their specific problem remedied, but also to get the entire school remedied. I wish that I had video. I should have taken video of all these conversations, because when I get to showing them, here's the law, and here are the facts at your school, there's different data sets, and I can promise you that they, number one, cannot cut you. Number two, they need to add more opportunities and scholarships and yada, yada. And it's silence on the other end. They are, in awe of, they had no idea. University of Maryland's journalism report, they just had this amazing report came out yesterday that said that 60% of parents and athletes know, quote, nothing at all about Title IX. They know nothing at all. I've had meetings with, say, the Pac-12 women. These are unbelievably smart women. And going through, again, they didn't know. These are our best athletes in the country. These are national team qualifiers. These are amazing athletes. And they thought in order to get what they wanted, they were going to have to strike, or that they were going to have to get some new legislation passed. No, we have the legislation, we have the regulations, and we also have the case law. So slam dunk, folks. But you have to get to the mechanism to make it work. If you reach out to us, we can, get things going. But University of Iowa just added women's wrestling. It wouldn't have happened without us.
So Nancy, talk a little bit to our audience here. We have people from a wide array of areas in sports. What can we do to help, and what's the best way to reach you to support your efforts?
Yeah, the best way to reach me is just plain old email, hogshead@ChampionWomen, hogshead@championwomen.org. And we always need money to be able to be doing what it is that we're doing. Especially, as I was telling you before, we've got 3 major efforts. That's just one of them. And believe it or not, that's the one to me that is the most appalling, but it's the hardest one to raise money for. It's the one that people, I don't know, I look at other nonprofits and they have these games called, Keep Her in the Game, as though the issue is that girls don't want to play sports when they're in high school or college. That's just not the issue. And it's also a little bit victim blaming. Oh, the reason why you're dropping out of sports is because, you're interested in boys. Well, that's not true at all. It is that schools are just not offering girls and women the same opportunities. And how much both boys and girls, how much sports that they want to play or that they are playing is directly dependent on what's being offered. So as an example, girls in Maine have twice the sports opportunities, almost 3 times, twice the sports opportunities that boys in Florida do. Okay? Girls in Maine have twice the opportunities that boys in Florida do. So it's not that boys don't want to play sports. Of course they do. It is that Florida schools don't offer a lot. They offer less than, it's 30% of the boys get to play sports and only 20% of the girls get to play sports. Whereas in Maine, it's much, much, much more. So yeah, isn't that interesting that, when we first came out with our data and all this work that we were doing, it was actually hard to get any traction, any sort of recognition of what it is that we're doing. But as other things have been happening with women's sports, like when Sedona Prince last year put that TikTok video up, we could link it with all of our work to say, okay, don't just be mad at the NCAA for this intentional sex discrimination. You also need to call out your individual school. Most of them are afraid that the reason why they don't want to bring a legal action is they're afraid that they're going to have a break in relationship with their school, that they're not going to have that same school community. And that just is not borne out. We actually got a video of all these amazing women who have brought legal action against their school. And if anything, it makes them closer to their university. And generations to come thank them for what it is that they've done.
Yeah, I think we've seen that where the leadership at a group has taken that leadership role at a school, has really amplified their voice, has brought the community at the college closer together. Because if you think that, I think the number you said was 60% of the parents and athletes don't understand anything about Title IX. Let's take that one step further removed and take it to the average college student. And that percentage is going to plummet even further in terms of their awareness of what the requirements are. And so I think there would be a lot of advocates for these opportunities for women. And as you said, a lot of it is the victim blaming, because if we don't give young girls the opportunities to play sports growing up, right, it's always going to be a funnel. You're going to have less people playing in college than you have playing in youth sports. So if there's less youth sports opportunities to start with, you're not going to cultivate and develop as many female athletes at the college level. And so
wait, Roy, let me just interrupt you there for 1 second to say that the gap between how many kids play high school sports and how many are playing college sports is night and day. There's all college athletic departments for both men and women could double their athletic departments and not have any problem whatsoever. So particularly for the big schools that are like, 30,000 plus students, it's less than 2% of the student body has an opportunity to be able to play sports. So, right. So we're nowhere near that range of, well, if you don't give high school opportunities, you're not going to have college opportunities. Because one thing that the NCAA is pretty good at is they can start sports and they will have athletes show up. So rowing is a good example. It was not a high school sport until they made it one. It sort of fills a lot of the boxes. It is usually a pretty big sport. They wanted to have big sports with lots of athletes on it. So they started it, and you take a swimmer who doesn't have a college opportunity. You take all these other athletes, and you can make them phenomenal rowers. My brother was a rower in college. He was a rower at Harvard. And that's how Harvard recruited athletes, is they did not depend on rowers in high school. They looked for people around campus who, were tall and had big thighs.
Well, and it's interesting because you talk about those opportunities and you talk about this deficit. I'd love to, as we've got about just over 5 minutes to go in the show here, talk a little bit about how you see NIL impacting that gap and being potentially a source of additional funding or dollars to help shrink that gap.
Yeah, when a school facilitates those NIL deals, they are not exempt from Title IX. So a school can never hide behind the donor and say, it's not us that's discriminating, it's the donor, or it's the ticket sales, or it's the sponsor. And instead, they always retain the obligation to treat men and women equally. So a lot of these schools are, when they're facilitating, all the football players getting an additional $1,000, that involves Title IX. If Michael Phelps is in college and he and a fast food burger place comes and says, hey, we want you to, do something for us, and has nothing to do with the college, then that passes muster. Then I can see, it passing muster. But Roy, hold on. I want to talk about one thing that's really important before we get off here, about ChampionWomen's work on the issue of sexual abuse in college. One of the things that we do is when a coach is banned by their USA Volleyball or Junior Volleyball Association or the AAU for sexually abusing athletes, it's hard to get the word out. And it's very easy for a molester to really poo-poo it and say, oh, that's not true at all. I have an open door policy. Come and see me. And we did that with Rick Butler. And we told all the college community he was giving volleyball clinics at schools around the country. So we went around and we told the schools that, hey, this guy's been banned. He's a sexual abuser. And then we also told, these other communities that may not have known that this guy was banned and might have believed so we attached all the original documentation. Rick Butler is now suing us for $250 million, not for defamation, but because we, quote, interfered with his business relationships. So we have a GoFundMe now because we need money for our legal defense. And this is like the last thing in the world that anybody wants to give money to, but we desperately need it. I think we should be getting awards for our work. We have done so much over the past 12 years to address sexual abuse in sports, everything from getting statutes passed to changing processes for how it is that sexual abuse is addressed, to getting the United States Center for Safe Sport up and running and started. It's a whole new world than where it was just 12 years ago. The Olympic Committee didn't have a legal duty to protect athletes from physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. Now they do. Just 12 years ago, there was no insurance. Now there is.
Those are big accomplishments. Those are things that a lot of people from the outside don't understand what a great impact those have in terms of protecting the athletes.
Correct. So anyway, we want to be able to continue our work. So again, we have a GoFundMe, and we anticipate that at a minimum, it's going to be $150,000. We already have had somebody already donate $50,000, and just we have another $30,000 that we've raised, but that still leaves a huge gap. And when I first told my kids, like, oh my gosh, I'm getting sued for $250 million, right away my kids were like, am I going to college? It's like, don't worry, we'll make sure.
Not if you lose, right? And the thing that's crazy about that, you bring up that $250 million number, and again, I haven't had a chance to dive into the financial work of Rick Butler, but the concept that he would be losing $250 million seems like a pretty large stretch, given that typically somebody in coaching, no matter what their compensation is going to be, that would be, well beyond the amount of compensation that person would lose, even if they're prevented from coaching. So it clearly seems like just a big number to shock the world and put in media headlines and things like that. And you look at the abuse that's gone on in sports at so many levels. We've seen things, right? Everything from Larry Nassar at Michigan State to, doctors at Michigan. And it's crazy. And it goes on more than we even know even now. Right. And so you go back and look at the importance and the reason for the existence of safe sport is specifically that, to be able to have people understand what is going on and have some system or centralized data so that when a person moves and crosses lines or goes to a different state and completes their coaching applications and forms that there's no way to track where they've been and what they've done previously.
Yeah, no, it's a big issue. And you have to, I don't think most parents or hiring committees know about the U.S. Center for Safe Sports database. So it's there, all right, but you have to kind of know where to look. And it's not Googleable. You can't go Rick Butler banned. I mean, you can, because he particularly has lots of cover stories showing that he was banned. Yeah, no, it needs to be easier for other sports groups to be able to find these coaches, because it really does take a lot of effort, time, money. You know, you want to be able to give a coach or another athlete who has an issue with the USMA sport for them to get due process. Well, due process costs money. So if once Safe Sport has spent all this money to be able to do the investigation and be able to interview witnesses, et cetera, you don't want to just have it flush down the toilet and be meaningless. And so unfortunately, it's left up to small nonprofits like us to do that work, to make sure that the sports community knows about an abuser and make sure to get them out of sport. We cannot allow sport to be the vehicle that people, that coaches get access to athletes sexually.
Yeah, it's very disturbing, and we've seen it in such a large number, and that's just the ones that we know about. And we know that there's a lot more there that never get disclosed, or and hopefully, you know, people are being more vocal and more open about it. Gives courage to the victims that have gone through that abuse, and recognize that there will be a support network, and that they won't be pushed out and ostracized. But even today, when you talk to college athletes that have gone through some of that abuse, just their own fear and insecurities about their athletic career and what might happen, it's still a big concern and a big problem.
Oh, if we have a culture of making athletes obedient and compliant, you're going to have problems. It's no different than the Catholic Church. And the only reason why we know about Dr. Strauss at Ohio, or Dr. Anderson, or Larry Nassar, the only reason why we know about them is scale. But there are plenty of coaches, like at the Women's Soccer Association, who are also crossing boundaries and essentially requiring athletes to sleep with them, or they were going to kick them off the team. That really don't get anywhere near the same attention. So if a coach has, say, under 10 victims, then it's just not going to rise up to the right. But those are still very dangerous people that we need to keep away from athletes. I always say that not every coach is a pedophile, but every pedophile wants to be a coach. Because
it's easy access.
So much time. Exactly. They have so much time. They have so much authority. They have such a power relationship with those athletes. So we've got to make sure that sports are safe. And that's one of the things that Champion Women does. So please donate to either our GoFundMe or just go on to Champion Women. And there are lots of ways to do that.
Nancy, you're doing incredible work. I wish we had more time. I could go on with this conversation for 3 weeks and dive into all of these issues. There's so much important work, and I'd love to have you come back on the show and go through some more of that at a later date. But I want to thank you for coming on with us today. I want to thank you for all of the work and the time that you put into this. It's such important work. We need more people in this space taking on the charge, fighting those civil rights issues, fighting to protect our young girls and women across the country.
Thank you for having me on, Roy. I really appreciate it.
And to all of our viewers and listeners, we appreciate you taking time to join the Sports Philanthropy Podcast. This is your host, Roy Kessel, signing off. Please remember to live generously. Thank you.